Hello everyone. As Michael's just introduced, the reason that we're doing this webinar today is just in response to the recent and ongoing weather conditions we've had and the risk that from botrytis and other bunch rots that is being experienced, especially in New South Wales. The other thing is that we have started to get calls through the AWRI help desk, so we thought it was a good opportunity to actually get out to a broader audience with some information. I just firstly introduce the people that are speaking, so you can see my picture there. I'm a viticulturist at AWRI. Liz Riley will join us in just a moment, and then the others that you'll hear from or who are available to ask your questions during the panel session at the end are Marcel Essling, Matt Holdstock, Kristy Bartrop, and hopefully Paul Baguley. So as Michael said before, if you can hold your verbal questions till the end, but you can actually start typing questions if you've got questions. But if I could just ask that if you've got a specific question for a person, just let us know when you're typing who the question's for. And also if you do have a question later and you're asking it, just let us know where you're from when you're asking the question. So we've been talking to quite a few people across New South Wales just this week, and I've just given you a bit of a rundown here on what we've heard. Most of New South Wales is already at veraison in at least some varieties, except for Canberra and Tumbarumba. All regions have experienced rain, some significant rainfall, and we've had split reports from all regions as well. Now, botrytis is confined to those regions where we haven't seen veraison yet, so that excludes Canberra and Tumbarumba, and we've also had reports of other bunch rots in Mudgee and also the Hunter Valley. So while today's webinar is really based on botrytis and bunch rots, we do acknowledge that some of the other regions are, well, many of the regions are also experiencing downy and powdery. So while we won't be giving specific information about those diseases, most of the comments that Liz is going to be making in a few moments really they can be applicable to those diseases as well. So I'm going to hand over to Liz Riley now. So Liz.
Look, the concern for us is obviously the level of disease at low BOMA, which is obviously limiting our harvest options at present. Like, we can't bring fruit in, it's not ripe enough. We have uncertain weather ahead, we have wet soils, and we have lush and humid vineyards. So we're now seeing lots of, I guess, physical events occurring with fruit. We're seeing berries pushing off the rachis, we're seeing fruit splitting, and I guess, for want of a better word, we're seeing entrapment, where berries are either being squashed into the middle of bunches or have hail damage or are wounded and are stuck in bunches with berries closing around them. So all those physical injuries potentially lead to sometimes the same but sometimes different outcomes. So this slide at the moment obviously is showing what's happened when berries are pushing off. In this case, the juice is leaking into the middle of the bunch, or just pushing off enough that effectively those berries are becoming little microferments which aren't controlled, and we're getting sour rot or acetic fruit. So this is obviously happening in reds and whites, and there's like a collar around the middle of the bunch of acetic fruit. We're struggling with that because obviously getting anything on there to try and clean it up is very, very difficult. Some varieties we're seeing berries pushing off the rachis and fruit just completely popping off, and I guess that's less of a concern. Marty, maybe the next slide, please. So we're seeing lots of splitting as well, and obviously Kristy's photo shows how that can start to appear. So we saw on Monday, as coming off a couple of days of wet weather, that split was in virtually all varieties other than maybe Semillon. It's often quite hard to find in that Shiraz. A lot of people are telling me they've got nothing, but it's virtually all the Shiraz blocks we've looked at have got some level of split. We've had some dry wind, which is helping to seal it up, but those wounds are our big concern as well, and we'd obviously like to try and dry those up and reduce, I guess, opportunity for disease to take off. And entrapment, yeah, look, there's not a lot you can do when stuff's stuck in the middle. So really, for us at the moment, where we have split, our primary goal is to get that dry, and the options for us to increase airflow or to apply something that might encourage that drying. So trimming to open things up is one course of action for us. Applying products that I guess are hostile, so Paratex, PMS acidified brews to try and seal that wound. Now that's obviously only a short-term temporary measure. It's not providing any protectant capacity. It's just making things dry. So with more rain forecast, we remain vulnerable, but at least we'd like to think if we can seal the wound, we've got a fighting chance. And then some blocks will apply protectant after, as in a day or two later, once we feel confident that we've sealed those wounds. We might have the next slide, please, Marty. Where we have split or leakage, this is much harder for us to clean up, because our concern is this is where, again, more sour rot and acidic fruit will come in. Certainly in whites and now with some reds, where you'll go out and look at a bunch and there'll just be that one little golden or red drop of juice that's not rain or dew, and that's obviously going to be our hot spot. So we know that we can see some of that, but again, the more we're handling bunches, the more we're finding inside. So the challenge is really what to do. The alarm bells really start to ring when there's wetness in the middle of the bunches. Next slide, please. So again, this is on the left-hand side, splitting in Verdelho, which is a variety we generally don't see splitting at all. It's normally fairly bulletproof. You can see that it's nice and open. So not something we normally worry about, and that's relatively unprecedented to see that sort of split. But again, if you're not looking closely and people are just glancing at bunches, there's a feeling that everything's fine. The photo on the right is obviously Botrytis in Chardonnay, which is now well established. This is fruit that there was a little bit of a problem probably heading into Christmas with just the odd berry stuck in the middle of a bunch, and that's now escalating. So that level of infection with other bunches having similar levels of infection is really in trouble when it's only at 10.5 BOMO. Next slide, please. Now this is something that may well be limited to the hunter, and maybe Mudgee. This is bitter rot or granaria, which is a trunk disease. We see quite a bit of this from about 8.5 BOMO onwards. The berry that's at the bottom of the screen is towards the outside of the bunch, and with this rot, where the berry joins the rachis, it sort of seals over. So we find a lot of this fruit will actually drop off ahead of the harvester, or as it gets more and more disease, it just drops off. So where it's on the outside of a bunch, we're really not concerned about it and having to express that to winemakers, whereas the berry towards the top of the screen with the same symptoms is at risk of being stuck. And that sometimes they just dry up and, again, doesn't become an issue, but if they become trapped, other berries seem to I guess, catch it, and it can escalate. But more sour rot arriving as a result of that. So really it's the conundrum is what have you got, how much have you got it, incidence and severity, and then how to manage it. We might go to the next slide, Marty. So unfortunately this sounds very brutal, but we're starting to have to look at blocks with the thought process of do I spray it, do I pick it, or do I abandon it? And abandon does sound very harsh, but it's about weighing up the cost of spending more money for something that inevitably may fail. So there's a number of things that you need to take on board in making these decisions, and the decision may change on a daily basis. So weather forecasts obviously are vital, and we're certainly finding that the weather forecasts have only a degree of reliability, and it only takes one thunderstorm to turn 5 mils into 25. I guess it's about periods of wetness. Sometimes 5 millimetres, which is there all day, is much more damaging than 20 mils that comes in 5 minutes and goes away. So all of that needs to be taken into account. I guess how ripe the fruit is and the level of disease that's present. Winemakers obviously have target BOMOs as well as minimum BOMOs, and if you aren't going to achieve your minimum BOMA because of the level of infection and more rains coming, well then unfortunately the abandon strategy may need to come into play. So fruit condition is vital in assessing this, and fruit really needs, the fruit that's in trouble needs to be looked at every day or two as a minimum, preferably every day, and this process reconsidered. Again, if fruit happens to finally get a little bit riper, and for us getting into the 11s, 11 and a halves, deciding what you're going to spray, withholding periods become really into play, particularly if there's pressure on the entire region. If winemakers are looking for any possible fruit that can come in, if you think you're going to pick within 7 days, you really have to consider whether you want to spray, because it may limit your capacity to harvest it. Next slide, please. So really, you need to be, as you're working through the spray, pick, abandon scenarios, you really have to decide if the problem is fixable. Is it fixable by managing canopy and with just sunshine and airflow? Can it be fixed with chemical? And that chemical may be something that will either solve the wetness issue, clean up the disease or hold the disease, or just provide more protection going forwards. You've obviously got to be able to get product. You've got to manage withholding periods. But if the disease is very advanced, you also need to consider fungicide resistance. So if you go out with product and just keep spraying in the hope that you're going to salvage something and you don't, you're potentially going to create a resistance issue. The other big issue for me is coverage. So I'm not spraying a lot of fruit where it's very, very swollen and tight, because I know that I can't get penetration to where I want to get it in the middle of the bunch. And having used sunscreen applications through December and early January, I know that I'm not getting coverage on the back of bunches at the moment. So where I have split at the back of bunches, again, it's kind of unfortunately providing confidence that maybe doing nothing in some situations is the best option. Again, reviewing fruit condition daily before you go out and invest in putting sprays on. And as mentioned, trimming or opening up canopies is something to consider. But all of this needs to be done in the context of who's buying your fruit, their flexibility to either take it early, minimum BOMAs, withholding periods, and their tolerance of changes in fruit condition. I'll just zip to the next slide. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, after this is all over, at the other side of vintage, you know, everyone has a problem. It's a case of reviewing spray programs, what was being used, when it was being applied, so timing becomes part of that conversation. But also, particularly if you've had the trifecta of Botrytis, powdery and downy, is looking at your spray application and coverage. And I have no doubt some of the issues that we're seeing have begun earlier, because we may have had insufficient coverage back at flowering and not got enough spray into rachises and flowering structures. So whilst people probably struggle a bit with going out with sunscreen, it only has to be half a tank full, you know, a couple of points during the season to assess your coverage. It's a very, very good investment relative to losing a crop because you didn't have good coverage early. So sunscreens put through probably just prior to flowering, and again around bunch closure will give you a guide to how well your spray is getting where you want it to go. Marty, that's probably all I want to say at the moment. It's probably a case of taking questions and maybe toing and froing to some of those pictures if we need to.
Thanks, Liz. I just wanted to show people that there is a lot of information available online, and just quickly show people how to access that. What you've got here is a screenshot from the AWRI website. The address is up there in the top left-hand corner, so awri.com.au. And if you go to the home page, the bit there that I've got circled, the resources for vineyards, if you go to that section there and click on it, it will open up a whole lot of different resource areas for viticulture especially. Now there's lots of different things that you can find there, but I think relevant to the discussion that we're having today is the section here on agrochemicals. And if you actually click on the bit that says show all down the bottom, there's a complete list of some of the topics that are covered there, and especially for people, some of the calls that we've been having are around which chemicals are appropriate for use at different phenological stages. There's a tool here to actually guide you through that process of decision making. The other thing is that we've got a complete list of MRLs there, and so the other question we've been getting is, if my wine's going to Japan, for example, what's the MRL for a certain product? So there's a complete list there as well that you can have a look at. Okay, so that's all we've got in terms of a presentation, so we can go to questions. So just a reminder, these are the people that are available, except I don't think Paul has joined us. No, so unfortunately we don't have anyone up in Mudgee, but we do have Kristy. Liz is still around. Remembering we've got Matt, who's a winemaker, who can answer winemaking questions. Also Marcel, who has a lot of expertise in agrochemicals. And Liz, so we have got a fair few questions come through. I'm just going to have a quick look through them.
Just before you get started there with the Q&A, Marty, just a reminder to the panel, to the attendees, there are two ways you can ask a question. You can either type them in and send them through, which is in the bottom part of your control panel, or you can click the raise hand button if you have a microphone or you've dialed in using a phone.
So just a reminder to everybody, if you want to ask a question, there's two ways of doing it. You can type it in down the bottom of your control panel, or you can also click the button that's raise hand and you can actually ask that one. So once you click on there, we can see that you want to ask a question and we can certainly unmute you. But I do have a question here that is specific to Liz. Liz, are you seeing any difference between chemicals applied at flowering and incidence and severity?
I haven't done the legwork, but I would suspect no, based on the level of disease we're seeing. Definitely have sites that have different spray programs that do all have the same issue. I would probably say that maybe the people who are using the top shelf products at this stage have less of a product, but the problem is I've got fruit at various stages of maturity, as in 7, BOME 8, 9, 10, that some of my greener stuff may still have an issue. It may be greenness rather than chemistry that's maybe holding us back.
I've got a question here asking about what are the control options for organic and biodynamic vineyards against Botrytis and also other bunch rots. So I'm going to give that one to Marcel.
As far as the registered chemicals go, your main, or the only real one at this stage of it is the potassium salts for fatty acids, so EcoProtector. Personally, I haven't had any direct experience with how effective it is against existing infection, but it is said to have some curative as well as protective activity. So EcoProtector and the potassium salts, which have a 14-day withholding period.
Liz, I've got another one for you. The question is, how effective is acidified metabisulfite spray?
It depends on the weather and the conditions. I think as long as you can get good coverage, ideally it needs to be breezy, sunny and warm afterwards. The sunny bit is probably a bit optional. If you can get breezy and a little bit of warmth, as long as it's not wet, so wet and dewy or drizzly rain, I think you can get some benefit. Probably the thing to consider, which certainly something I hadn't been thinking of until someone mentioned it earlier this week, was you will potentially suffer some loss of canopy condition. So you need to consider, again, time to harvest by using it. So if it's something just to dry things up within a few days for whites, no drama. Making the decision to apply it to reds that have moist splits rather than, I say, wet splits. Having to consider the canopy condition thing makes that decision a little bit more complex. I could probably tell you in a few more days after the stuff that went out yesterday, see how it looks.
Thanks, Liz. I've got another question here. The question is asking, are we aware of any fluoro dyes to look at coverage? I'm going to give that one to Marcel.
I am aware that fluoro dyes have been used in the past. I think it's far easier now just to use the sunscreens and add a handful into a tank and see how your coverage is going rather than have to go out there later on with lights to try and see at night where your coverage is. So I think fluoro dyes are still around, but I don't think they're all that popular. I think there are easier ways these days to check your coverage than using fluoro dyes.
Liz, what Beaumay did you see the first signs of botrytis in the hunter?
I've got fruit that would be, I would say probably low 9s. I suspect some of it could still be in the mid-8 to mid-9s where we're first seeing it, and by 10.5, some of it is definitely well away and becoming those clumpy, well-established botrytis.
So if there are any more questions, please write them in now. Oh, yeah, we've got one. Would the use of super spreaders, for example, do wet, be of benefit to penetrate into bunches and on backs of bunches? Do you have experience with them? I'd say, Liz, this is one for you.
Yes, we played, I think, with Designer a couple of years ago, but it was in a season where we had much looser bunches than we have now. I think, I don't think you get anything through something that's really, really tight. I guess that's potentially one of the other perks of Eco Protector. It's a bit soapy, so it might slip around a little bit more. I think, it's one of those season-by-season vineyard variety decisions about whether you have a go with those. I'd probably have some sites I would consider it, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's just way too tight for me to consider that spend because, again, they're not particularly cheap.
Liz, what about, and I guess this one is specific to the hunter, that would you go out now and do any leaf plucking, or is that a question of doing the assessment as to how far you've got till you're likely to pick or not?
My personal thought is leaf plucking probably needs to be done when fruit's a bit greener and a bit more robust. I think doing it now just is going to create more injury sites. I'd be more inclined to do careful trimming that would let things lift up and maybe alter leaf orientations and things rather than, I'm not talking short back and sides trimming, it's more of maybe a high skirt that gets more air in underneath rather than anything that risks wounding more fruit, it's just more wetness.
Okay, I've got a question for Matt. What do you recommend for the handling and treatment of diseased grapes at the winery?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen, for the question. It's quite an involved question, actually. We've got quite a few resources on our website that will detail this in a little bit more detail, but essentially, I'll try and summarise it down to a few points. Obviously, to eliminate as much botrytis as you can coming into the winery. There's going to be a few things that you'll need to do. You want to try and keep your fruit as cool as possible. The other thing you want to do is keep it as free of oxygen as possible, so you'll be looking at higher sulphur additions in the vineyard. I'm presuming we're talking probably about white fruit here at this point in time. There is some protocols for reds as well, but I'll probably just touch on white here. So with your, so essentially, if it comes in mouldy, then there's going to be a few things. You're going to need to do some lactase testing. Lactase is the enzyme that's present with botrytis, and that's going to be your biggest enemy. It is an oxidizing enzyme. It uses oxygen to oxidize phenolic compounds in the fruit, and it will have a wider range of oxidating capability than the tyrosinase enzymes that are present. Bentonite will be your friend, so pressing, there'll be a lot more press cuts. You'll need to address the fruit at that point in time. So at that point in time with the juice, you'll need to look at it, assess it, analyse it for lactase. If it's present, then bentonite will be a good help. The physical activity of removing the bentonite removing the enzyme via using bentonite is the way to go. You may need to do this 2 or 3 times. The juice will potentially become very clarified, so there's some issues associated with solids as well, so back adding clean solids. The enzyme additions at pressing will probably need to be twice as much depending on the quantity of lactase present. Fermentation, you probably want to try and inoculate as soon as possible at that point, and once fermentation is complete, I know I'm skipping over some steps here, but once fermentation is complete, you probably want to check for lactase again. If it is still present at that point in time, then you may need to look at pasteurisation. Now, at that point, we've got some further information, but I think we're probably a little way away from pasteurisation at this point in time. But look, essentially, there's a few things. Your sulfur rates are going to have to be higher. You will use bentonite to remove the lactase activity, the mouldy characteristics and the enzyme out of the juice. Keep the fruit as cool as possible, and be aware that you're going to be doing more steps than usual when making wine from clean fruit. So, look, feel free, Stephen, if you want to contact me outside this, and we can probably go over this a bit further. And I've got a really good summary paper that you could probably take away with you and have a look at.
Another question for you here, Liz. If we're seeing berry splitting in Shiraz leading into some warm, hot weather next week, is it worth being proactive and spraying a protectant, or should we hold back and wait to observe any Botrytis development? So that question's coming from the Riverina.
No, I'd be going out with a protectant. If you've got clean fruit, even if it's got a little bit of split, I'd be going to protectant. There's nothing out there that's going to unequivocally clean it up. So, yeah, prevention's better than cure. We're certainly trying to do that now, getting a bit more Rovril or Ipridine out on cleanish looking blocks.
So just a reminder that Kristy is in the Riverina, if anyone's from the Riverina listening in who want to ask anything specific about what's going on up there. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our questions. So if you want to contact us, oh, hang on, we've just had another question here. Liz, do you consider using Capdan?
Closer than, can't use it closer than 30 days to harvest. So for us, it's our last Botrytis spray just before veraison, with the view that we're saving Rovril for now. Yes, so yes, but not within 30 days of harvest.
Thanks. We've just had another question here about asking whether we've had any experience with antagonizer. There have been a couple of trials ongoing in the Hunter the last couple of seasons, but without a lot of Botrytis, they've been a bit inconclusive. There's more trials going on in the Hunter now, and also trials in Mudgee and in Orange with these products. So, yeah, we're hopeful that we'll get some good results this year, and we'll be able to talk about those later this year. We've just got another couple here. I'm just working out who they go to.
Yep. So we've got a question there. Is there anything worthwhile to do in winter for Botrytis or powdery? And then it says lime SO2. Liz, I'm happy for you to have a crack at that as well. The theory is that you take as much of the disease out of the vineyard as you can. If you've machine harvested and there are berries that haven't been picked up by the machine harvester and they're sitting there and they become mummified and they store Botrytis and they store up a lot of inoculum, then you're trying to get that out of the vineyard or at least onto the ground and out of the bunch zone if you can. And as far as powdery goes, I haven't heard about people trying to spray for powdery after well, perhaps certainly not over winter or over dormancy. But Liz, perhaps you've got some other idea about that?
Look, the lime sulphur is an interesting one, and I know after the couple of tough seasons up here, 8 and 12, a few of the old timers kind of threw their hands in the air and went down that road. No difference now. I had a big chat to Barbara Hall about it at the time, and her comment was there's a reason that it's not widely used, and that's that it's not effective on those fronts as a sterilant. So I think at the end of the day, it's about cleaning up what you can, pruning off rackuses obviously, and getting them out of your fruit zone for next year, and starting with a very solid program. Don't wait till you've got the disease. You know, prevention and getting sprays on when you've got good access early generally reaps dividends. Certainly this year, unfortunately, the weather conditions have been very dry early, short rackuses, good set, so already small tight bunches. Then when you add too much water, it physically got to go somewhere. Even the best spray programs are under pressure. So Mother Nature, unfortunately, can kind of overrule all the inputs.
Liz, I've got another couple for you. Have you had any experience with the use of Peritec to control botrytis?
Peritec has been used up here in some seasons and has had varying success. So in 2008, which was a very wet year where we had free moisture, I think, every day for about 30 days, so just drizzle, it wasn't necessarily lots of rain. It struggled, and I think it's similar to the PMS. It needs to go into dry, ideally dry fruit, and get some drying, warm, sunny weather to work really well. So I consider it and PMS essentially interchangeable. And the challenge with Peritec is if you purchase it and then elect not to use it, being peroxide, it only lasts 12 months. So if you're going to buy it, you have to use it. It's got no value to carry it over.
And Liz, the other one for you was that when you're using your prodione, do you adjust the pH of the water spray in the spray tank?
I personally aren't the one applying it. I would like to think that the operators have read the label and done that, but I couldn't tell you with my hand on my heart that that's what's happening.
Okay. There is another question there about whether or not we know of any regions who haven't been affected by botrytis, and I think if I refer you back to that first slide, all the regions that are past veraison, and this is specific to New South Wales, we have had reports of botrytis happening in those, or being present in those regions. And we have actually had some other reports here from South Australia where they're a little bit more advanced in their maturity that, yes, we've also got botrytis in those regions. So in terms of coming up with the magic bullet or the solution against botrytis, sorry, Darren, I haven't got that answer for you. So I think that does bring us to the end of the questions. You can see up on the slide there, if you want to give us a call about any of these things, our phone number's there, so it's 088313 6600. If you've got viticulture inquiries that you want to email, the email address is there, so viticulture@awri.com.au. And winemaking services, if you've got a winemaking question. And if you want the contact details for Liz or Kristy, feel free to give us a call and we can pass those on.